Good
day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 162. Okay, we should have AI joining us in a while. I don't know what other guests we'll have beside that. We shall see. I've sent a few invitations out. How are you going this evening, Mitch?
Same old, same old.
Dear. Fair enough. Did you have a first subject that you wanted to bring up this week?
Like the only topic I can think of for this week is the Tories looking set to get 0 seats. That's the only topic I can think of that is any significance this week.
Did you have a first subject?
Speech by Rishi Sunak.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, mate.
I haven't really got much to say. It's just the Tories they're predicted to get only 3 seats in the next election. So we might actually see total Tory annihilation in the December election if the polls are to be fully correct.
Yeah, sadly, I can't believe they'll only get 3 seats, but they're certainly going to get the biggest wipeout since World War II, I suspect.
Well, I mean,
I'd like them to get 3 seats, but
Well, that's the thing, Robo, is that you've got Rishi Sunak with his speech. I'm guessing it's an issue over my end because the internet's pretty bad over my end lately, so I don't know if it's an issue over my end because there's an issue from where you're speaking to me.
You sound all right to me, mate.
I don't know why. It's like, yeah, it's just like at the moment, it's stuff like, I don't know, let's say it'll take 10 seconds to load up just to reload a YouTube page or whatever, but then it says the internet's for 4 or 5 bars.
So right.
What else going on with it?
Right. Okay. Well, I don't know what that is, but you sound okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like on one end, it's like
anyway.
Yeah, it's like I don't know, I might be stood. But as to the news about the Tories, I mean, yeah, it looks like they are obviously going to get wiped out a lot worse than what happened with Blair back in '97. So I suppose that's the one.
Yeah, I suppose that's a bit of a wipe. They're going to get wiped out. Yeah. Yeah. Look, my only problem with it is that Labour is not going to be any better, in my opinion.
I think
because Labour and the so-called Conservatives are unified.
Well, at the end of the day, the Tories have to be the first party to go because Labour, I mean, they're not going to go unless George Galloway really cuts into their Muslim vote. Then it's a situation where a Labour might get supplanted among the Muslims, and then I won't be. I mean, you get some party on some people on Twitter going, "Oh yeah," as demographics become more and more deciding. Like for example, Muslims might flock all over to George Galloway. All the shitlib types might migrate. Might just stay within the Labour, Green, Lib Dem sort of circles. The Tories, I mean, I often got my own gripes about Tory voters being the kind of people who would still vote Tory, even if God knows what would happen, even if Armageddon was tomorrow and being directed by Tories, or even if that's, I often said that story where, back when I was campaigning for UKIP, I had a Tory voter who I once asked him, like, if Boris Johnson came around his house, set his barn on fire, shot his dog, and raped all his female relatives to death, he'd still vote bloody Conservative. And the guy just went, "Yes, I suppose I would." So that's kind of one thing about Tory voters, and yet we're seeing in the polls that the Tories are absolutely screwed, under Rishi Sunak. Because so you got that speech he did where he was castigating the far right, especially, even though the far right have no representation in Parliament, for example.
Well, I mean, the far right it hardly exists in Britain, to be honest with you. Not in the sense that people like Indian banker Sunak use it. It hardly exists. I mean, who are they? Who are they talking about when they say the far right? Do they mean the likes of Tommy Robinson?
But yeah, I mean, AA said on his stream,
yeah,
like,
you know, I mean, they certainly don't mean the likes of us. That's for sure.
Yeah, because that's the
I
thing.
don't think they mean the likes of us, man.
As I was saying, like, they're not going to allow anyone to the right of Tommy Robinson manifest. Like, you get Sam Melia, who gets locked up, and aside from a couple of articles, yeah, like largely people of our side of the aisle don't get a look in, because why would we? You know, we're the kind of people that the establishment want to, what's the word, memory hole or otherwise just keep every picture altogether. Whereas Tommy Robinson, he's always castigated as the main far right figure in all this. Because at the end of the day, like, the ultimate end of his goals is just civic nationalism, just without Muslims around, but we still get mass immigration.
Yeah, he's counter jihad. He's a counter jihad dude as much as anything else, for sure, and gets a certain amount of backing from a certain group, shall we say. But on the other hand, he's been sent to jail several times. So, you know. But yeah, you're right. He is as far right as anyone in the government will even countenance. You know, as you say, poor Sam Melia, who is basically a political prisoner of the British government. That's all you can describe him as. Someone like him it doesn't even enter into the discourse as far as the government's concerned, because, you know, they can't talk about people like that or people like ourselves who, you know, see the major threat facing Britain today being unending mass immigration, which is the major threat facing Britain. Let's be honest. You know, it's certainly not Putin and the Russians. It's the unending mass third-world immigration, and it's not even the small boats coming across the channel, as bad as they are. It is the legal immigration, which is at ridiculous levels, you know, really ridiculous high levels. So there we go. Wolfish Nationalist in the chat is suggesting that Tommy Robinson has been arrested again. So there we go. I mean, as Jobu was saying in the chat, I mean, the reason they mentioned the far right is it's the only they can only mention, you know, extremist Muslims, etc. At the same time as they mention the mythical far right. You know, I'd like to know what violence or terrorism the far right's ever done in Britain. I mean, basically none, as far as I can work out. So there we go. AI, how are you going today, mate?
I'm all right. Can you hear me okay
Hello
at the moment? Hello, can you hear me?
You sound fine. You might want to be a little tiny bit. Yep, that's much better, mate. That's much better.
Okay.
I think there must be. How are you going today, AI?
I'm okay, thank you. I think there's a delay, Iron Duke, in what I say and what your response. So I'll try and leave some gaps.
Yeah, I know, and I don't know what to do. All right, mate, the only thing I can suggest, AI, if you have a first subject you would like to bring up, perhaps you would like to talk about that, and I will try leaving and coming back, and we'll see if that improves things, because I don't know what else to try, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, Mitch.
All
right. Yeah. So Iron Duke should be back. So I think a first subject. I don't know if you were going to discuss it, but I was going to talk about not so much the by-election result with George Galloway, but the general reaction that's been from the likes of Sunak and the Tories and every other shitlib under the sun. That I was going to sort of talk about that reaction.
Yeah, the only topic I can think of is all the polls are showing that the Tories are absolutely going to get dropped in the next election. Like,
oh yeah, it's it wouldn't surprise me if I think they could go as low as like 18, 20 odd seats. Which would be well, that'd be the end of the Tory party. I don't see any recovery for them at the moment.
yeah,
But on the topic of the by-election, of course it George Galloway has won there. Interesting side note is in that by-election he had 2 campaign leaflets for 2 ethnic groups in the constituency. So like the Asian Pakistani lot had campaign leaflets where he would talk about Gaza and all that. And then when he was delivering leaflets to like the white Brits in his constituency, he was talking about grooming gangs and more local issues and all that sort of stuff. So that was quite interesting in that regard. I and what the reaction from this, because Sunak, of course, on the day after the by-election, this was seen as like the worst event in British political history. Sunak delivered an emergency speech outside Number 10. Bearing in mind, Prime Minister speeches outside Number 10 is only reserved for really the resignation of a Prime Minister, a declaration of war, or some other major event, maybe like the death of a monarch, or so. Probably not death of a monarch, but you get a very, very important, important events, important things.
To let people understand, Mrs. Thatcher did a speech like that when the Argentinians invaded the Falklands and we were sending a task force to take them back. That's usually the sort of reason British prime ministers do those sorts of talks.
Yes, he did, and of course he along with all his advisors would have known, and it's been decided that this is a bigger occasion, and he delivered a speech where effectively this Indian bureaucrat, in my mind, declared war on the British people. I don't know how any other way to really say it. He said that he used it to attack radical Islamists, and then he spent a good portion of it talking about the others, the radical right, which is the same face of the same penny, or whatever however he coined it. And as everyone, my initial thoughts while watching this, because I did manage to catch it live, because I saw it, people talk about it on Twitter saying that he was going to do it, it was like 5:45 or something like that. So I caught it live, and I think as everyone's reaction was, well, number one, what far right? There is no far right mass movement, going around the streets and forcing its will on the streets, because if there was, I would be there. And the second was his now sort of new task force to combat extremism, which everyone in our circles understood is, oh, this is actually just a way to further target dissident people, and it's nothing to do with radical Islam or radical Zionism or whatever in this country. This is to deal with people like us, people like on the dissident right, people like that Sam who's been locked up, and of course the front man for all of this will be low IQ street thugs who are acts for the government as the convenient villain, like Tommy Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, someone in the chat was saying he's been recently arrested yet again. Tommy Robinson, that is. And also, you know, as Mitch and I were saying just before you joined us, I don't think the government even looks beyond people like Tommy Robinson, to be honest with you. Like when they're talking about the far right, it is counter jihad people like Robinson who they're talking about, you know.
Yeah, I
For the
mean,
most part.
yeah, I enjoy that. This is something that's quite interesting. Is I've been following that Mariana Spring. You know who that is. She's like the BBC's disinformation
Yep.
person. I've been following her because she tends to tap into radical right wing stuff in the UK. And one thing that's really funny is she does like Tommy Robinson. She does like this. There's this newspaper called The Light, which I've never heard of. I've never seen anyone in our circles ever talk about. But they seem to be like hippie, yoga loving, anti-vaxxer types. And they have a bit of a presence not too far from where I live. They've gone after Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, but he's quite a high figure and public figure anyway in that regard. So and she's done like the odd bit on PA, but one thing I was thinking, and this might tie into another story, is that recently on the right, and I know we tend to reference it, and people in chat will reference him. And you interviewed a friend and colleague of his back in the day, which of course is Jonathan Bowden. And I'm seeing more and more on social media, on even on like TikTok, and people have been sending me links on TikTok to Jonathan Bowden speeches, which have been shortened and gone through that whole edit thing that they do on there. And what's quite interesting is that people like Mariana Spring, there's obviously a limit that they won't even attempt to delve into or touch. And there's that element on the right that they just won't touch. And bearing in mind a great deal of the online, and if people, let's say people who are sympathetic fascist ideas, genuine fascist ideas, right, maybe even self-identify as fascists, a lot of them will use sort of material like pulp fascism or various Bowden speeches, but they never ever go into Bowden. And that was just something I was thinking about the other day, because of course there's this account online called Polly Redhead or something, and she put out a tweet saying, "Oh, my dad back in the day recorded some Bowden gatherings in the pub, and this has never been released, and I
remember this. Yeah, this was last week.
Yeah, and she was saying, "Oh, I need a hand. I don't know how to get it from my tape recorder to digitalize it on my computer or anything." And I thought to myself, "Oh, this is excellent. This is great. More Bowden content." But then I looked at her account, and there was a few red flags which were pointed out. And I sort of noticed this as I was going along, which was the account that she had was created like literally a couple weeks ago. She's come out of the blue, out of nowhere. And I know that there are people who let the real people who do like for the government counter extremism, probably they don't bother with Tommy Robinson, let's be honest, because he's no threat. He's probably, at best, he's probably working with the government on most of these things. And I know someone say, "Oh, he's been arrested." Well, has anyone actually ever seen him in a prison cell? But yeah, I think.
Look, I do see what you're saying, and there may well be some truth in what you're saying. I would say that how should I put this? The neo-Nazi types online don't tend to be enormous Bowden fans on the whole, because Bowden is a bit more complicated than that. In fact, quite a lot more complicated than that, if you ask me.
Oh no, I mean the people who are more fascist orientated. I don't mean like neo-Nazi, the neo-Nazi types. I mean sort of the more
okay, fair enough. Now I see what you're talking about. Yeah.
Italian-minded people, if you get my drift.
Yeah, no worries. No, absolutely. Although I'd say Bowden was a bit more complicated than that even. But I would just like to say Bolero393 is saying, Iron Duke, this YouTube channel went into Bowden. You interviewed a BNP guy who knew him. Yeah, although what I would say, Bolero393, is I interviewed a former BNP guy who knew him very well, actually, and for quite a long time. That's Eddie Butler. And Eddie Butler, when I interviewed him, which was a while ago now, although you can still find the stream on this channel, when I interviewed Eddie Butler, he was actually working for the For Britain Party, which was a mainstream registered political party. So, yeah. That's what I would say about that one. I mean, I would also say, if this girl, and I remember the girl that AI was talking about, AI mentioned her on one of his streams about Bowden last week, which was a good stream. To go and check it out. But if she really does have Bowden tapes, there will be umpteen people very willing to help her get those digitalized so that people can find them, because there is a very big market for Bowden speeches. So,
Oh, I mean, a lot of people came out the woodworks and were fighting over claims for it. It was actually quite, I mean, me included, of course, but yeah, I would say with people like that, just err on maybe the side of caution. One thing I was
if she's a very new account, yes, I agree.
I mean, the only thing I was thinking is if there is somebody somebody like your the person you interviewed who did know him, if he could verify, if she could like list the dates and the contents of those tapes, if anyone who was around back in the day could verify the if it was recorded, or if they know of any events of those recordings to take place, because that would if people back in the BNP days then don't remember those speeches or don't remember anything to do with that, then I would say that it's probably some sort of trap, let's say. But
that is certainly possible. I mean, it's certainly possible, but because we're talking about quite a few years ago now, and Bowden gave a lot of speeches, and I mean, he tended to give speeches in the back rooms of pubs and so on, often to quite small audiences. So how much people would remember after all these years? Yeah, some of them were really very small.
Yeah, the vanguardism. I think the one that is probably one of the top ones, vanguardism. I think that's like 9 people in the pub or something.
Yeah, they're not. They weren't given to big audiences for the most part. That's true.
No,
I mean, I love Bowden. I think I've listened to everything of his that is recorded that we have at the moment. So, I mean, it would be great if there were some unrecorded Bowden speeches, some new ones. Some new ones that we haven't heard. That would be excellent, because I really like Bowden. But I do think there is some danger that you will get kind of fishing expeditions from actors who are not on our side, if you see what I mean. That's certainly possible.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, in this country, for example, there have been people who have been arrested for holding on to what the courts and the government declares as extremist content. And when it comes to tapes, I mean, you know, whatever we view online is out there already in the public domain, so it's harder to enforce. But tapes and everything, you have to be very careful. You just have to be very careful what you're getting in. And also, you know, if anyone does have any footage, like any Bowden footage out there, if you're watching this, I would try and capture the footage and upload it yourself. Don't take it to you know, any people outside, because if anyone, if a normie was to come across that, they might you know, spurg out and try and destroy the tapes. So yes, there's about, I think there's about 9 or 10 episodes.
Yeah, I think
of,
you would have to be careful.
yeah, I think there's about 9 or 10 episodes of Richard Spencer interviewing
You're talking about
Bowden.
Vicky Spencer's interviews with Bowden. Yeah. No, I don't like Richard Spencer, but I've listened to those because I like Bowden, but I don't like Spencer. But yeah.
It was difficult listening to Spencer, and the trouble I have with Spencer is, I think one thing he has taken away from Bowden is, I mean, for him, Spencer's whole thing is how useless conservatives are, and I don't know the American conservative scene in and out to detail that well, so maybe there is some, you know, valid argument for why he says and thinks the way he does. And I know he's not, he hates MAGA and everything. I mean, the only thing I can think of is, if Bowden was alive today and he, you know, his understanding of MAGA, he probably would oppose it maybe on the idea that it's a movement for the masses, it's a populist, it's not elitist, it's, you know, that's probably sort of, I think that's how he would sort of approach.
It's definitely not a vanguard movement.
No,
MAGA is
and
definitely not a vanguard movement, that's for sure.
no, I mean, one thing that one of the, because I think I've probably gone through most of Richard's not Richard Spencer's, Bowden's you know, all the footage and speeches out there. One of my favorite ones is on the poet Robertson Jeffers. Have you heard of that one, Iron Duke, at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I'm like you, man. I've seen just about everything that's publicly available on Bowden.
Yeah, and I mean, I've read his book. Well, the book that was published after his death, but it was a collection of pulp fascism, and also Why I'm Not a Liberal. I've gone. I mean, I've literally gone through that several times. But I mean, the one on Robertson Jeffers, I mean, that one is, you have this poet thinker who is, you know, he's out in early 20th century man, out in California, uber traditionalist, probably would describe as a reactionary. But what he is he incredibly elitist, and what the tragedy that Bowden puts across is it's what the America that could have been, instead of like mass culture, mass appeal, and then what you see, I guess, what you see today, and what we see in our European countries as like Americanisms being imported in.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, look, I mean, Bowden's an interesting character, but he was certainly a great orator. One of the greatest orators in the last 50 years, probably.
Why is
I think that was his
Bolero?
great strength.
Yeah, what? Sorry, Bolero. Robinson Jeffers. No, it's Robinson Jeffers. Robinson Jeffers. I don't know what Bolero is getting at there. If is that a joke, I don't get it. Is
I
that
have
meant
no
to be?
idea, mate. I have
No.
no
Anyway,
idea. Bolero is saying other good orators, Pat Buchanan and Enoch Powell. I'm not sure that I would say Enoch Powell was a great orator. He said it was a typo, by the way. I'm not sure I'd call Enoch Powell a great orator, and I haven't really heard Pat Buchanan. I've read quite a lot of his writings, but I haven't heard many of his speeches. So
I mean, Pat Buchanan.
yeah.
Pat Buchanan was. I mean, Pat Buchanan back in his heyday. Yes, he was a good orator. He could work the room. Enoch Powell, no, he wasn't much of an orator or speaker at all. I mean, he was just a great, he was a philosopher, really, wasn't he? He was a great thinker, philosopher.
Yeah, he was a great thinker. He was a great thinker, and he wrote well. But I'm not sure he was a great public speaker, which you need to be an orator.
No, he wasn't. I mean, the Birmingham Address. If you listen to it, it isn't. I mean, the thing though is, we're told in the West, one of the ways that the evil far right is able to have its influence over people, like mid-century German, is their orator skills, right? It's the skills of able to hypnotize the people. And the thing though is, in the Birmingham Address, it's not so much. I mean, because Enoch Powell, his voice is it's quite light. It's not very commanding. It's not, it's not a commanding voice, but it's the content of what he's saying in that, which is what made him popular, made his message and what he said popular. And not just among Conservative voters, but across all party voters, even the Labour Party and everything, because they saw what was happening, and they saw the disaster, and like the disaster we have today. It's that's why, hence why, on Twitter every other day, Enoch Powell is trending.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, Powell was undoubtedly a highly intelligent man and a great thinker, but he wasn't really an orator. I mean, one of the things that makes Bowden so extraordinary is that he gave these talks without notes. He didn't write them out beforehand. He did them extempore. He made these great talks without notes, and most people simply cannot do that. Did Bowden ever meet Powell? I'm not sure, Wiggles. I'm not sure. If he did, it would have been through, because Bowden was in the Monday Club for a while, wasn't he?
Yeah, he did. When did Enoch Powell die? Was it in the 90s?
97 or
80s,
98, I think it was.
But I'm not absolutely certain. Oh, was it? Okay, sorry, I beg your pardon. Well, there you go. So, and Bowden died in, what was it, 2010 or 2011?
I mean, it is possible, because I mean, for example,
yes,
yeah, because remember, Bowden started off. He was in the Monday Club.
It is possible because they were both members of the Monday Club. So
yeah, and he was I mean, also remember Bowden,
which for anyone who doesn't know in the audience, for anyone who doesn't know in the audience, the Monday Club was a right-wing group within the Conservative Party, which doesn't exist anymore, of course, because the Conservative Party are not right-wing at all now. But back in the day, those guys who were on the right of the Conservative Party were members of the Monday Club.
Yes. Sorry, I think I induced. There's a bit of a delay going on. So what I was saying was, the Monday Club was disassociated from the Conservative Party. I think it was under Haig when he came in, to get rid of the nasty party, you had the nasty party image, right? And I I don't think Bowden. He could have met. He could have met with Enoch Powell, but I'm pretty certain he knew Sir Roger Scruton. On that account, because I
Yes.
know he met Gove, and I know he met I think it was Michael Howard as well.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. I'm pretty sure when I was talking to Eddie Butler that we discussed this briefly, and Eddie Butler wasn't sure, but he thought there was a good chance that Bowden had in fact met Powell at some point via like people who they knew, mutual acquaintances in the Monday Club, etc. So
yeah.
So I think that is certainly possible, but I don't think we really know.
No, unless someone can confirm it.
Bolero is saying Bowden met Powell briefly. Wouldn't surprise me. Sorry, mate. Carry on.
It's quite funny because we're talking about this, and I remember somebody asking me once, did the Duke of Wellington and Nelson, did they, or Wellesley as he was then, ever meet Horatio Nelson and Admiral Nelson? And I believe they did briefly. Was it where was it? Was it Admiralty House or something like that?
They met when Wellington came back from India, and he was waiting for an interview with somebody. And Wellington had just returned from India. It was before he went to the Peninsula, where he became very famous, of course. But he'd just come back from India. And Nelson was waiting in a waiting room outside. And apparently, according to Wellington, who retold the story, Wellington was not very impressed with Nelson at first, because Nelson was being a bit of a big head, and was saying, "Oh yeah, I'm Vice Admiral Nelson," and all this kind of stuff. And Wellington wasn't very impressed. But then, because they were waiting quite a while, they started to speak in a bit more detail about what was going on in Europe with Napoleon and this sort of stuff. And at that point, Wellington became very impressed with Nelson's knowledge of politics and what was going on with the Napoleonic system in France and all this kind of stuff. So and they did meet, but only once.
Oh, yeah, because I think it was quite soon after you had the Battle of Trafalgar and Nelson's death.
Mr. Gently Benevolent is saying in the chat here, on the Bowden archives, there's a Q&A where he says he knew Powell vaguely in the Western Civilization Bites Back interview. There you go. So they apparently...
that answers... Yeah, that answers our question then. Well, that's pretty good. I need to go back over that. I mean, the funny thing is, when you search, there probably is like the odd one I haven't watched yet. I'm just thinking the one that I was just having a look now. The one that I don't remember watching. Was what was it? I think it's his Liverpool address when he's in Liverpool with the BNP.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to stick with the pub ones because usually the party ones are a bit. I mean, they're quite good, but they're a bit too, well, party oriented. But he still has like good things on that one. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Wiggles in the chat is saying that Greg Johnson, who I don't think is a very reliable witness, and who I don't like at all, said Bowden used some artistic license in telling his stories and who he'd met. No clue how true that is exactly. Well, we don't, do we? But I'm not a big fan of Greg Johnson, I have to say. But that's just me.
Well,
and Greg Johnson is, of
well,
course, a complete
yeah.
Ukraine shill for one thing. But yeah.
Well, it's not unreasonable because we know that all these people, all these figures, were in the Monday Club at one point. So, I mean, it's not it's not out of the question. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And so, yeah, I was going to say it does. I think it's probably more animosity with Greg Johnson than anything else. But I mean, one thing you find with Bowden, a lot of his critics on the right, on some even dissident right circles, is because he was a pagan and he wasn't a devout Christian that in the way that they claim to be.
Yeah, I mean, Bowden's religion was a bit opaque. I mean, Bowden would say that he was he would say he was a pagan, but I don't think he was a pagan in the sense that some people would say today. I mean, I don't think he was a survive the jive type pagan, shall we say, who's thought about this stuff deeply. I think in Bowden's case, it was more a reaction against the way that modern Christianity has gone. I mean, you guys may or may not agree with that, but that's my own opinion as to why Bowden would say he was a pagan.
I think he said in one of his what was it, in his essays, he said what was it, morally and ethically a pagan, and then defender of traditionalism. Because I mean, one of the things he I guess where he does stand different from other pagans is he does accept that the role Christianity has had in forming Western civilization and Western canon, and that you can't really tear it separately from it. But I mean, I get when he has,
like it or not, AI, we're all cultural Christians, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Fundamentally,
if you're, yeah, we're all cultural Christians.
I mean that battle that a lot of people want to fight was kind of ended about 1,500 years ago. So yeah, that sort of bad. But what he does point out though is that it isn't so much the ideology or the what goes on in the ritual side. It's whether if there's any energy, or what he calls like fire energy, that is behind it. Because that's why people like, I guess, like Evola and stuff, they will talk about the nature of, say, the Templars or the Teutonic Knights, or the Christian, or time when Christianity was quite, well, it was masculine, it was overtly violent, it was I guess you could say had elements of pagan morality to it. Of course, that world of Christianity.
AI, even in the 19th century in Britain, you had muscular Christianity, which was a movement. Which was, if you look at the British Empire, for example, there were quite a few British soldiers, for example, who were overtly Christians, but it didn't stop them being extremely effective and tough soldiers.
Oh no, definitely not. But the problem
it hadn't been taken over by this wet liberalism that these days absolutely smothers Western Christianity.
Well, the worst quality. I mean, one of the things is that and a lot of tradcaths, a lot of Catholics online will point to, and they're not entirely wrong, but there is a bit of context to this, because it goes both ways. Is they'll say, well, it's the rise of Protestantism, and it gave way to movements like Quakers and people like that who are pacifist, feminine, weak, and it breeds that sort of mentality that's sort of developed in the West. And there is elements of truth to that, but I would say I don't think I don't think it's a Protestantism itself, because you wouldn't call an Ulster man 100 years ago, or just over 100 years ago, weak, a weak specimen when they were whether they be fighting in the trenches or
No.
they'd be fighting against the newly created Irish Republic. You wouldn't say that. I think what it is, it's a I think you have the event of, as you mentioned, World War II, and the events that subsequently came after that. I think there was, as I mentioned before, that there were tactics deployed that was used against Germany called denazification, which was used in all our countries, and it's been used to atomize and disconnect the people from their identity group. And this is something that Bowden will talk about when he said, being English isn't enough, being white isn't enough, being British isn't enough. You actually have to look at yourself in the mirror and go underneath the skin and really read and understand more about your group and your identity and your race and all that sort of stuff. And that was what he was getting at there. It's and that's what's sort of being disconnected, because it's we've had what now, 4 generations of globalized mentality.
I think that's a good segue to bring us on to the next subject. But before we do that, Mitch, did you have anything you wanted to say about Bowden and the stuff we've been talking about for the last, 30 minutes? Because you haven't said much.
Not really. I've got nothing to say.
All right. Well, I think that's a good segue on to the Church of England wanting to give £1 billion in reparations for slavery. What do we think of that bullshit? To me, it's just amazing. I mean, what did the Church of England have to do with slavery, for a start? Where is the Church of England getting £1 billion from? And even if they have it, who exactly are they going to give it to? Given there are no slaves alive today, certainly no slaves alive today who had anything to do with the British. So what do we think about that bullshit, which is all I can describe it as?
Well, it's the Church of England represents the wider establishment of the West. It's about worshipping the out group and persecuting the in group. I mean, there is no religion. I mean, number one, I mean, let's be honest, there is no church in the land, and I will also attest to the Catholic Church to this a bit. I mean, the Catholic Church still has a bit of its principles and teachings around, but even then, in some cases, it's been waning. It started. I mean, people will know to start off with the concept of the modern church, and basically what it is it's the idea that God and the church can be modern, but the point is God is eternal, and spirituality doesn't exist in our realm. It exists above man, and the problem is all religious thinking has to be looking upwards above man, but today it's looking downwards at the masses and its resentment. And there was trouble, and from a Christian point of view, resentment is the work of it's the work of the devil. and that's all I've really got to say on that. It's a
Look,
total inversion.
I don't understand how. I don't understand how in 2024 the Church of England, which was anti-slavery in the late 18th century for the most part, why they're even talking about this, let alone saying they're going to give £1 billion to assorted black people who've never been slaves. I mean, it's just
I
utter
think
nonsense.
if I was to be a bit more Machiavellian, I guess I would say that the Church of England has got a problem because it can't be too Christian. It can't promote any Christian values because that's literal fascism in the eyes of our current culture. But at the same time, if they don't promote Christian teachings, a lot of the blacks and black people in this country and other areas of where you have Anglicanism will feel disenfranchised because the church doesn't represent Christianity anymore, and they'll go to other churches. So they're having to do like effectively bread and circuses for their for their congregation, let's say. And I mean, let's be honest, probably the only people that go the only large racial group of people who go to a church of England service today is probably black and ethnic minorities. So I would say that's probably why they're doing. If that's why they're doing it.
Sadly, there's some truth in that. Yeah, sadly, I believe there is some truth in that.
I know that there's
certain sorts of churches.
I know that there's like a free Anglican church, which is like a separate thing within or separate to the Anglican church, where they're a bit more Catholic orientated types. And I mean, I don't know too much about them. I've seen a few stuff online. They appear to be, what I'd expect to be in the Church of England. They're
There's
traditionalist.
There's always been there's always been a division in the Church of England between the High Church and the Low Church, and the High Church has always been a bit more Anglo-Catholic. When I got married and my son was baptized, that was in a High Church, Church of England church in a country area of UK. And that was much more traditional. The vicar didn't believe in female vicars and this kind of nonsense, which the mainstream Church of England does these days. But yeah, I mean, the Archbishop of Canterbury is a lefty, basically.
Yeah,
he's
I won't.
He's an out-and-out lefty.
My local village church, the vicar we have there is a female one, and she wears a skirt and everything. I just won't. I won't go. Well, I won't go to that. I will never go to a church where there's a female vicar because I don't believe women can deliver anything of that of deep spiritual value. And that's just a a genuine thing. And even, okay, before the pagan side, people say, oh, what about the pagan god priestesses? In most civilizations where you have priestesses, they're usually exclusively for women. As fertility, that sort of stuff, exclusively for women.
And it was always only for certain cults anyway. It was not a general.
Yeah, it was limited.
In general, pagan priests were men. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was only certain cults and certain goddesses and this kind of stuff who were represented by women.
Yeah, because I don't believe that I don't believe women can think objectively in any sort of context. If I'm absolutely honest, I don't think they can. I think a lot of them.
Look, I'm not. I'm not a Christian, really, even though I got married in a Christian church and I had my son baptized. But I did those things more because I'm a supporter of tradition than because I actually believe in it, to be honest. But just on the basis that I am a supporter of tradition, I don't support women vicars and this kind of stuff, because that's not the way things were done or should be done, in my opinion. But there we go. You any opinions on this, Mitch?
Yeah, I'm not a Christian either, so I don't really have. I mean,
I'm a cultural Christian, as we said earlier, because I think we all are.
Well, I mean, that's unavoidable, isn't it? You can't really help that. I mean, even a lot of the pagans will disavow any sense of sacrificing animals or people to their gods. So, well, to the gods like Woden and Funor. So, yeah. But at the same time, it's also, well, I'd say Christianity has done its part in. Because, I mean, on one hand, yeah, sure, the Christianity back like 1,000 years ago, but even then, it was still. Like, you still have like these traditional stories of, let's say, someone like Edric the Wild, who, even though he was a Christian, he still believed in things like elves and orcs, kind of things that you'd see in Tolkien, which are very pagan.
Well, I mean, the famous one, Mitch, the famous one that you will know about is Alfred the Great, who was, of course, a great Anglo-Saxon English king, but he also claimed descent from Wotan. So I mean,
I saw, and maybe Mitch can get his reaction to this. There was some account on Twitter, some like American conservative, Christian conservative type, and he said that the contemporary Norse and Anglo-Saxon pagans didn't actually believe in gods. It was just nature and various different personalities of nature. They didn't actually believe that there were a pantheon of gods.
That's not my strong point.
Mitch
would know more about that than I do.
Yeah, I don't really believe in my voice. Like, I mean, the only thing I saw was this conservative twat over in America calling pagans demon worshippers or whatever it was. He said, saying that, oh yeah, like because paganism is like growing a lot among Americans. This is a proof that everyone's worshiping Satanism over in America, and it's just like it's that sort of attitude that drives people to be pagan to begin with.
I mean, I would say a lot of people who declare to be pagan are basically anti-Western, anti-Christian, mass egalitarian socialists. A lot of them are, a lot of them will have like rainbow flag and justify degeneracy that goes with it. And the trouble with if you're going to be a pagan, you have to follow a pagan belief that adheres to your own group. If you have like an English, French, Irish, Scotch, blonde-haired American in Minnesota who's worshipping or believing in the Hellenic pantheon, that's just LARPing. There's no other way to describe that. It's just bullshit, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know too much about the Celtic.
I think Wiggles is making a good point. That Charles Kingsley wrote that Wotan was an actual ancestor of Queen Victoria, and that the Protestant churches were Nordic. But the thing is, when he was saying that, I think he was going back to that idea that Alfred the Great, for example, claimed descent from Wotan, even though he was a great Christian leader of the Anglo-Saxons in England. That is correct, isn't it, Mitch? He did claim descent from Wotan, didn't he?
Yes. He
did. In the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, yeah.
I mean, even the Bishop Asser, Bishop Asser,
that's what I thought.
Yeah, would stated that, and it wasn't just him though. It was many Anglo-Saxon, like the Mercians, Northumbrians, and would claim descendants from.
So
actually, Mitch. Sorry,
Oh, okay, sorry,
Mitch,
carry on.
wasn't there
AI.
one ruler who claimed descendant from, was it Freya?
Freya would. I don't know. I mean, the main ones are Walden and Funor. Like, I mean, you had. I mean, you have some who. I suppose a more obscure one would be. You had Freya as in a goddess, but she was a goddess of fertility. I won't be
I
surprised if I was a dynasty who claimed descent from someone like. I won't be surprised if it's something like that. But I know the Northumbrian dynasty. I don't know about the same royal family as King Offa, like the Mercian royal house. But I know Northumbria, they claimed also Walden. I, I think East Anglia, they claimed Funor. Because I mean, so-
Mitch, I'm right in saying, am I not, that like Wotan was the English version of Odin, basically?
yeah, it's the same god. It's just different name.
The
It's just slightly
Anglo-Saxon
different
version
name.
of Odin.
Yeah, it's kind of like how
Yeah,
like
that's what
Zeus
I thought. Yeah.
and what's the Roman equivalent of a name now? Was it Jupiter or something like that? I can't remember. Forgot. But it's like I don't know, like Poseidon and Neptune.
Yeah, Jupiter. Yeah.
Or yeah, it's just essentially the same god. It's just different names because
Yeah.
but they have the overall same origin. So
Yeah, that's
because
what
I
I
mean,
thought. That's what I thought. But yeah, so you could argue, therefore, that even King Charles, to some limited degree, supposedly is a descendant of Wotan. So
I wish he acted like it, but yeah, it's like
yeah, I wish
so you have
I wish he acted like it too. But yeah, absolutely.
well, yeah, that's the thing. 'Cause, I mean, in Anglo-Saxon society, it was essentially a matter of you had to claim descent from one of the gods to rule because I mean, on one there's a divine right to rule, which some people might critique. Like, it's a different sense back in Anglo-Saxon times compared to what it was like with someone like Charles I, how he interpreted that divine right to rule. But I mean, Anglo-Saxon times, it's if you did not claim descent from a god, then you would always be seen as illegitimate. So, and the Witan would always be obliged to vote for someone who did claim descent from a gods or god in some way, shape, or form. So that's how
I think
things
also,
work.
like, I mean, the kind of pagans, the kind of pagans that AI was talking about, the lefty hippie type pagans, tend to be Wiccans and people of this kind of ilk. I definitely think there is a difference between those types of pagans, who are often women or very feminized men, and people who I would regard as more genuine pagans, like people like Tom Rouse, Survive the Jive, etc., who I think probably is pretty genuine in his beliefs and definitely has studied this stuff pretty deeply, And I've got a lot of time for people like Tom Rouse. I think that they're entirely genuine.
I was just having a look. I think it's a one of the medieval Swedish families claimed descendant. Well, they're from Odin and Freya, and this was after their Christianization. So they were Christian at that time anyway. So yeah.
And also, don't forget, the Christian Church took over a lot of festivals and sites. Christian churches are very old cultures, like the Scandinavians, and also in England as well.
What I mean, there's debate of how, like, when you have the like Bluetooth in Denmark or what have you, or Magnus and such, how, like, it affects in many ways what you had, like within Anglo-Saxon England, is the royalty became Christian, but the masses still remained pagan. And you see, even under Alfred the Great, normally everyone's Christian, but they are still ethically and morally pagan, in their outlook on life and in the way they perceive the world.
Yeah, fate was I mean, that's one thing. Like fate was something which, because in the pagan tradition, it's your fate is chosen, and there's no, like, there's a very fatalistic outlook in the sense that, you know, if you're destined to die, let's say with your head split open at a battle, then that's the way you die. You best make your peace with that. I don't know what the Christian view of such things would be, but yeah, that's the Anglo-Saxon view and Scandinavian view, and that's why, for example, Anglo-Saxons fit so well within the Varangian god and kept traditions of the Huskarls alive,
Yeah.
because, you know, that was the
Well,
Anglo-Saxon outlook on life.
Yeah.
well, I mean, the Christian,
Yeah.
the Christian argument be that God has a plan for your life, and fate is basically God's plan for you in for your life, effectively. I guess that's how it would be interpreted.
But I mean, we've also got to admit that, like, modern Christianity, as what started us talking about this subject with this nonsense of the Church of England about reparations for slavery, modern Christianity is very much feminized, and I think feminized is the main thing about it. It's being almost totally feminized today, so that it's all about not doing any harm to people and all the rest of it. There is a big difference in even stuff, quite a lot of stuff in the New Testament, if you read it the way it was written, rather than interpreting it as some modern Christians do today. You know, the modern Christians today will go on and on about, you know, turn the other cheek and all the rest of it. But actually, the Christianity was a lot more downright originally than it is today. You know, there was a lot of there was nothing bad about being a warrior in original Christianity. I mean, look at the Crusades, for God's sake. You know, it wasn't always this weak, feminized religion that we have today, which I would argue is much more a result of modern interpretations than what's actually written in the Bible.
Yeah, I mean that you have Saint Augustine, for example. I mean, he was the one that adopted, the Christians adopted the aspects of Roman law where they, I guess, justify violent action and warfare. I mean, that's always been there in Christianity. I mean, Iron Duke, I found a clip, and we can't play it. It cannot be shown on YouTube at all. It can't be shown anywhere. But it's a clip from that film Agora, where you have Bishop Cyril delivering a speech.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, and what happens is the small hat people have just burnt down a church, killed some of his key followers, and what he does is he delivers probably the most based rant in all of human history, and he ends that this group are cursed and exiled, and all that sort of stuff, and of course that subsequently leads, like in real life, the small hat people were kicked out of Alexandria. So, but the thing is, as I can't remember who said this, but they said if anyone went back in time to that period or any period, and they saw Christianity, it would be so radically different. The energy and the atmosphere of it would be unrecognizable for most modern people, even like ourselves. It would be such a bizarre thing. I mean, it would be great. It'd be the best thing ever, but it would be so strange to get your head around.
Well, I mean, even if you go back to Constantine the Great, I mean, what was it? What was it he supposedly saw in his dream? In this sign conquer, you know. Conquer,
Yeah.
not submit to, conquer. it's
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And the I'm just trying to think of other example. I mean, yes, in that sign conquer, and you could argue that, I mean, that being the foundation of the birth, the
and again,
Christian rulership.
the Crusades, the Crusades AI, which
Yeah,
were a great outpouring of Western energy, but also were a counterattack against Mohammedanism, which had been attacking the West for, at that stage, centuries.
yeah. Actually, I was reading, Charles Oman. I've actually finished it.
Yeah.
Charles Oman. I finished his Dark Ages book, and
The military historian.
yeah, I wasn't aware that when the Caliphate invaded Visigothic Spain, guess who opened the gates to the cities like Toledo in the south to the Muslims? Just have a guess.
Do we? I don't think we need to do an early life check on that one.
Yeah, but you get my point.
Especially not on YouTube. Especially not on YouTube. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. But I mean, yes, you get my. But this is what the argument you had with it was with AA when he was having all these tradcaths come after him, because he said that the Crusades, or the warrior monk, was the exception, because that isn't what it is now. And he is right. Those were exceptional cases of exceptional men, of a very small minority. And of course, the animating principle was, because I think people got a bit confused. They were saying some people thought he was saying that that wasn't real Christianity, or that's not what, they weren't sincere in their beliefs. I mean, it's complete opposite. They were sincere, because they were like the most radical they could be in their time. But I think the argument is, as he said, is that sort of mentality in those people cannot exist today. It's impossible to live in modernity and exist with that way of thinking today.
I mean, look, if you look at the Crusades, for example, the Pope promised, and he was the head of the church in those days, much more than the modern Pope is, because there wasn't Protestantism in those days. He promised people who went on crusade that they would have manumission for all their sins, and that they would pass into heaven more easily. And it was because all these people did believe in that stuff that they went. But it was also genuinely a counterattack against Islam, which had been attacking Christianity by that time for generations, and had taken over lots of Christian land.
Well, if you think,
were talking earlier, AI, about Alexandria, which, of course, when it was taken over by the Arabs, was a Christian city.
Well, you had the center of Christian centers. You had this, was it the See of Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, Carthage, the strongholds of Christianity were all taken over, and the two remaining ones, was it Rome and Constantinople, were left. So it was, and of course, as we mentioned, Spain was overrun by the Umayyads. So yeah, I mean it was totally defensive. But I would say, going back, I mean, I talked about on my stream with Nord Hugo, where I said that in many ways the Crusades, the first Crusades in particular, not so much after that, it was if you look at that as a story, it's basically a story of Germanic peoples on their ascendancy, adopting, because the people say they adopted Christianity. I actually think Christianity was Germanized by them. It was just it was adopted by them, but it was largely Germanized by them. And you have the various like Normans. I mean, of course, the first fight back, the first proper fight back, I guess you could say, of Christians successfully pushing the Muslims back were the Normans in Sicily and southern Italy, the Hautevils, and they were, and Beaumont was the same person to be active in the Crusades to capture territory, and what was it, Edessa and Antioch and elsewhere against the Seljuk Turks and the Mamelukes, particularly the Seljuk Turks, because they were the most aggressive nomadic Muslim threats at the time of the First Crusades.
I mean, I think it's also interesting. If you look at the wars in England between the Anglo-Saxons and the Norse, people like Alfred the Great were mostly willing to allow Norse pagans to convert, and sometimes they did so, and sometimes they didn't. But but overall, the way history was going was that those Norse nations, the Scandinavian nations, were all eventually going to convert to Christianity, and of course they did. So there's a big difference between that, which was other Northwest European people, and what was going on in the Middle East with the Muslims. Very different.
Yeah, very different. And of course, remember in the Danelaw, in Viking controlled parts of England, even like Guthrum's in East Anglia, they never, it's not like they enforced a doctrine of like conversion to Norse paganism. The Christians there were left alone. It wasn't, none of that even crossed their mind, because they knew that they were separate peoples. I mean, if I remember, I believe in Guthrum's army, for example, you actually had levies of Christians in his army.
I'm not even going to attempt to answer that one, AI, because I know that Mitch will know much more about that than I do. So I'll leave Mitch to answer.
Not like I say, not like the house carls or anything, but like just the bog standard levies. So it wasn't like, I mean, effectively it was just a war between various rival royal families. Let's be honest. I mean, what you saw in the Mediterranean was totally a mix of racial and sectarianism, because of course the first two Islamic caliphates were explicitly a racial Arab awakening in the Middle East. It was totally, even the few Persians, by the Umayyads, the odd Persian or two that converted to Islam were still technically second-class citizens. It wasn't until much later under the Abbasids where you had Muslims who were more Persian Muslims and more Turkic Muslims and what have you, and Berber Muslims, that the dynamics changed, and it was you had this sort of overthrow of Arab nationalism. I guess you would say Arab nationalism or what have you. So
I mean, look, they try and pretend these days, AI, that in Spain that there was some that everyone was getting along in Muslim Spain, but this was not true at all. The Christians were very, very much second-class citizens under the Muslims in Spain.
Yeah,
very
and
so.
also
they had to pay extra taxes and all sorts of things.
Did you? Yeah, but I mean, also depending on the Muslim rulers, because I mean, if you think to the time of El Cid, you had what they call the Almoravids, who were from Morocco. Because what you had is you had the various Khalifas in Spain, because you had the collapse of the Cordovan Caliphate, and you had all these little Islamic nations kingdoms in Spain, principalities in Spain, Talifas, and the Almoravids, stormed across, and they were more radical, if we put it that way, or more Islamic than before. And so, in some cases, you did have Jewish persecution and Christian persecution as well, where in the past you had there had been more favourable towards Jewish and Christian. So it did vary. It varied on depending on which group was running the show at the time. But yeah, definitely the funny thing is, and I remember it was
what was that AI? What was that tax that the Christians had to pay? Was it a jizya? I think it was called, or something like that.
jizya tax, and also I mean they had to pay it. It's for people of the book. So in some cases you had Jews having to pay. As I say, it depended on the rulers at the time. You either had to pay or you had to convert. I think there was it was extended for obvious reasons to like the Zoroastrianism set, but as time went on, as Persia became more and more Islamic, it was I mean at that time most Persians were Muslim anyway, so it wasn't it wasn't thing to but the thing was during the first two caliphates, they were actually against the idea of people like Christians or Zoroastrianism were actually converting to Islam because they needed the money from that tax. So there was an incentive, the high incentive to keep the Islamic faith strictly Arab centric faith, excluding non-Arabs. But I mean, of course, that came to an end with the Abbasids, who were more, dare I say, more inclusive. they were an inclusive caliphate.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah, relatively well. I mean, compared to the previous one, I guess you could call it inclusive. So,
what do we think, gentlemen, about the idea of spending £1 million on a war memorial for Muslims in Britain?
I mean, what is there to be said?
By the so-called, in inverted air quotes, the Conservative Party. What do we think about that one?
I mean, what is there to be said, really? I mean, it's just zero Tory seats. Like we need the Tory party to get absolutely smashed.
Yeah, 0 seats, 0 seats. That's my answer.
Yeah.
0 seats.
Yeah. I mean, I always think, when you go into a Western country, and it's not just Britain, same thing in Australia, same thing in most European countries now. As you go around, you look at various tourist sites, and you look at shopping centres and all the rest of it. I think we have enough monuments to Muslims, to be honest, in all the great big blocks, concrete blocks and barriers that are put everywhere to stop trucks of peace, or trucks of pieces, as they should more aptly be called. Surely that is enough of a memorial to Muslims, is it not? I mean, I think it is, frankly. I don't think we need a £1 million war memorial to them as well. I mean, if the Pakistanis or the Saudi Arabians or any one of these Muslim countries want to put up a war memorial to Muslims, they have my absolute permission to go do it.
Well, one thing I don't understand about
I don't think Britain needs one.
I mean, Iron Duke, from one thing I do understand about this is if they have to put a war memorial up, it would be in dedication and memory to the British Raj, surely. I mean, that's where it's coming from, isn't it?
Yeah,
It would be because in Muslims, I mean, it's not like they were Muslims defending Britain or anything. It was all centered largely in Burma and the Far East.
Yep, I don't disagree. But yeah,
I mean,
it's just insane.
I mean,
and it's a bribe. Of course, I mean the reality is it's a bribe to extreme Muslims in Britain, and it won't work. You know, it won't even work.
no, and
but I mean, I watch. I used to do war gaming when I was younger. You know. With miniatures and so on, like, you know, Battle of Waterloo and this kind of stuff. When I was a young dude, and I noticed, because I watched some videos about that still, that these days you can buy a game which is set in the Battle of Britain, right? And it will have an Indian pilot on the cover. When I very much doubt if there were more than two of them involved in the whole Battle of Britain, you know. But somehow, out of the three pilots they show on the cover of this game, one of them should be an Indian dude. You know, it's just so it's just such bullshit.
Well, I mean, I guess
such bullshit.
Well, again, I don't think there was a single one, because again, I think the British Indian Royal Air Force, again, they were operational in Malaysia and Burma during the entire war, and parts of China.
Yeah, they didn't operate in Britain at all. No, yeah, they didn't operate in Britain at all. It is conceivable there were one or two Indians who were in the RAF. It is conceivable, but you would be talking about one or two at the most.
Yeah, one or two. I mean, because I've had this argument with leftists before. Well, I had a right back along. I was trying to explain that the British Indian Army and the British Army were technically separate, because it was over that whole 1917 film where you had mixed, like a battalion where some of them were Indian and some of them were English. You know which one I mean. And I said, well, that's not accurate. Well, why not? Well, number one, there weren't any Indians there at the time, but forget that. Even if there were, they would all be in their own separate regiments. They wouldn't be mixed like that. Okay, they would have like they would have like English or British officers, senior officers, but both armies were different, completely different.
Yeah, and I'm not sure there were many. I'm not even sure there were many Indian troops left on the Western Front by 1917 anyway. I think by that stage, most of them had been sent to Mesopotamia and the Middle East and Africa.
Yeah, I was going to say most of them were either in Africa or Middle East or one day Iraq, because most of them were fighting the Ottomans.
There were Indian troops on the Western Front in 1915 and 1916. There were, but they didn't see all that much action. But most of them were then sent to the Middle East and to Africa to fight the Germans in East Africa and to fight the Turks, because they found they didn't do very well in Northern European winters in the trenches.
Surprise, surprise.
Given that movie is set in 1917, I'm not surprise, exactly. But I'm not. Given that movie is set in 1917, it's the title of the film. I don't actually think there were all that many Indian troops left on the Western Front by that stage anyway. And as you rightly say, they certainly wouldn't have been in a mixed unit with British dudes. They would have been in their own unit, their own battalions, in their own brigades, in their own divisions. They wouldn't have had anything to do with British troops other than their British officers, who all had to be able to speak Urdu and other Indian languages.
Yeah, which my grandfather
could do. Be the
it's.
I thought it would be something like all soldiers had to learn English, because it's like, I know It's like in the Russian army, you get all these different ethnic groups where they all have to speak Russian because there's no way a Russian is going to learn like 100 languages to communicate with the troops. So I thought it was the same with our British.
Yeah, no,
Indian
that's like
officers.
officers. Yeah, no, the British officers in India were expected to learn their men's languages. Just as today, the British officers who served with the Gurkhas are meant to learn Gurkhali. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I say my grandfather, because he commanded, he was in the British Indian Army as an officer, as a major. He learned Hindi and Urdu. I mean, it's exactly the same language, but you dialectal differences. But yeah, he could speak fluent in both in the language, and for him it was useful because he wanted
were
to know
all
what the
expected to.
yeah. I mean, one big reason was in case if they were plotting anything, he could understand what they were saying in their language. So a big one. But because one of the problems that he had was that during conflict,
all British officers joining the Indian Army were expected to learn their language.
Yeah, I mean, one problem the British
But they
Indian
did
Army
fight in
did
their own
have.
units. They weren't mixed in with the British Army. The British and Indian Army were two different things.
Yeah. So hold
like
on,
an
Andrew.
Indian brigade would have a British battalion in it. Because a brigade in the Indian Army was 2 Indian units and 1 British unit.
Yeah.
If it was an infantry brigade.
But
that was British units who were serving in India, whereas British divisions did not have Indian troops in them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was going to say the one of the problems the British Indian Army did have, especially in World War II, was the you had the animosity between the Hindu and I mean, this was a problem probably throughout its time, the animosity between the Hindus, the Muslims, and the Sikhs, and not also and especially towards the end, I mean that was always a problem that would occur. They wouldn't. You had that. I mean, not so much the Sikhs, to be fair, because they were quite. They weren't as drawn into the whole sectarian thing at that time between the two sides, but they're a bit more trusted. But I would say, if you actually look, how many was it 2.5 million during World War II from India were recruited?
Yeah, it was the largest all volunteer army in history. Because no Indian soldiers were ever conscripted. They were all volunteers. Britain never conscripted Indian soldiers.
Yeah, they were
unlike
all volunteers
British soldiers,
too.
of course, who were conscripted from 1916 onwards. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting. The reason why, I mean, if you look at
they
it,
had to volunteer.
I remember
no one conscripted them.
Hold on, this is really difficult because there's a delay and it sounds like I'm talking over you, and it's quite difficult. So I'll just say that in India, you did have like a martial tradition in certain families, so that hence why you had this this willingness in that regard. But the 2.5 million figure, I mean, that was if you were took this memorial stuff, what percentage of that would you say be Muslim? I would say maybe 20% were Muslim, maybe 30.
Yeah, probably something like that. I mean, it is obviously a bribe directed at the huge numbers of Muslim immigrants who are now in Britain. That's all it is, and it won't work. That's the other thing. It's not going to make these guys suddenly think they're British. You know,
Well, yeah, because
it's not. It's a bribe, and it's a bribe that won't work.
well, like I've just drawn the connotations. Okay, a memorial to Muslims fighting in the British Army, that for Britain, right? That is going to go immediately back to the Raj and everything, which is something a lot of them, especially not so much their parents' generation, but the younger generation, absolutely hate, because it's evil white colonialism in their minds. So yeah, I mean, there's no gain from
Well,
it.
yeah, it makes you
No
wonder
one has
why they're living in Britain. It makes you, the AI, it makes you wonder why they're living in Britain, though, if they hate the Brits so much.
Well, I think
And many
in
of
their
them
minds,
do, of course. Many of them do, of course.
yeah, you know, I mean, I would say that the question with them is it's numbers. It's not some. A lot of people fear of the Islamic takeover, and that has happened but the way that it happens is not like they subjugate the large portion of the population and they become Muslimified or Islamified. It's more of a case of, well, they just make life intolerable and force people out of certain areas in the country. But yeah, it's
And to say
it's a
nothing of
difficult one.
grooming gangs and all
Yeah,
this
yeah.
kind of stuff. But,
Well, I mean,
you know,
my
not to
message to
mention child grooming gangs and all this kind of stuff.
well, I mean, that is the worst. But as I've always stated on my channel, and when I've come on here, as one side of it is, if you're a parent, white parent living in Northern England, don't allow your kids to hang out with Asian men or Asians at all. I mean, it's that case of total separation on an individual level. That is.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all, man. Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
I
that's
don't
the only way
disagree
you
at
can
all.
keep. And
And
if there's
particularly if they're little girls, particularly if they're little girls. Yeah.
and I would recommend, if there's a problem in your area, get all you and your British people together and organise and form an action group to complain to politicians like George Galloway, where he has promised to clamp. He promised on his leaflet that if there was a grooming gang, he would go out there personally and apprehend them personally. So, hold him to that on that promise. So,
Yeah, well, let's hope people hold him to that. Let's hope people hold him to that. Yeah.
yeah.
Let us hope they do. I don't know. I just think Britain's in a very, very sad way at the moment.
Yeah, it's in a very sad way, and I mean, the thing though is, as the racial politics stuff becomes more and more apparent, there is like I think there is like a chance for and you see this with the Conservative Party's unpopularity, and it's not necessarily benefiting Labour in raw numbers, because it's not really doing that at all. A lot of people are just straight up checking out of politics, but as many people have noted, this is fertile ground for something new.
Problem is that
to
AI, my problem is that the biggest of the smaller opposition parties, that Reform and Richard Tice, they just won't talk about mass immigration. They won't even talk about it. Not legal mass immigration, which is the real problem. They will not even talk about it.
Reform is a waste of time, though. I have no time for reform. They're just, I mean, I don't even know what their function is. I mean, number one, given the fact that given the state of the Tory party, right, in its current state, and at the by-election in Rochdale, where they should have at least become the second party, easily beat the Tories, they barely even pulled through in that by-election.
Yes.
I mean, it's quite clear that it's not like UKIP back in the 2015 or the BNP back in the day, where there was genuine energy and fight and will and support and leadership, real leadership in it. Reform hasn't got that. Richard Tice is a half-wit. He can't.
Absolutely. Look, I've never been a fan of Richard Tice. I don't like him very much. But the natural guy who should take over, who is Nigel Farage. And it is so obvious that if Farage right now said that he was going to step into the leadership of reform, he would absolutely get elected. In the mood of the country now, he would get elected. And if he was leading it, and if he was willing to talk about mass immigration, and if he was leading reform, if Farage was leading reform, and he was willing to talk about mass immigration, including legal mass immigration, and how it needs to be at least drastically reduced. In fact, it needs to be stopped. But I mean, even if he said it needs to be drastically reduced, reform would get quite a few MPs. I mean, this is just obvious now. But Farage shows no signs of wanting to do that whatsoever. Not a sign at all.
No, the reform is effectively Tory light. It's a Tory light stuff, and the people. I think
they're part of the. As far as I can see, they are just about part of the Unifi.
Yeah, people want genuine radicalism because we live in an age of where there are radical problems, and where problems are radical, you need radical solutions. That is the reality of it, and that's maybe not something a lot of people want to hear. But the sort of respectable, minded style of politics is gone. It died a long time ago because those guys who have that idea of respectability killed it by ruining the countries in the West and allowing treacherous elements to turn our countries into third world shitholes.
I've got to say, I've got to say that I don't think it's radical to even talk about stopping immigration at the moment. I don't think that's radical at all. I think that's just common sense. It's just common sense that if you don't do that, Britain is absolutely being destroyed before our eyes by mass third world immigration. It's being destroyed, and we can all see it. I mean, all right, our Indian banker viceroy, Rishi Sunak, maybe can't see it, or at least will claim he can't see it, but everybody else can. Everybody else can.
I would say, Iron Duke, there are parts of this country there are parts of this country at the moment where, especially younger people, people younger than me, my generation and younger, where modern Britain, in all its horror of diversity and everything, multiracial makeup, is normal. It's normal. So for them, anything different from that, I mean, they can't conceive of Britain in the 80s and 90s, or even earlier. They can't even conceive of that world. And they've been brought up to think that world was evil fascist times. So anything that is adjacent to that, anything that's separate from that would be radical. I mean, I cannot tell you how far. I mean, I went up to London. And the stuff there, they were all wearing like shitty American style tracksuits and clothing. You had like multiracial. There was nothing English about anything. That is a reality, and that's not just London now. That's everywhere, because in the last few years that way of existing has been exported everywhere. I think Carl Benjamin talks about it in Swindon. Lotus Eaters talk about it in Swindon. It's happening in my local town as well. It's a real fucked up Tower of Babel. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. It is pretty insane. But, we end up saying the same thing week after week because the same problem is there week after week. The big issue for anyone who's on the DR or anywhere really, who is really right of center, the issue even people who are just socially conservative, the issue is mass immigration and stopping it. Don't do that, Britain's going to be destroyed. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
certainly.
if you want to save Britain, you have to stop mass immigration. We just have to. It's the number one issue by far. But no one who's in even slightly in the mainstream of British political life, including say anything about it.
No.
Mitch, anything to add to that one?
I mean, on one hand, I do wonder. I mean, as much as I hate reform, imagine, let's say, we end up with a position where they've got more seats than the Tories, for argument's sake, in this upcoming election. I just think, as much as we hate reform, I don't know, it might reveal a sense that, oh yeah, people are just so knackered with the Tories and Labour that they're willing to go for a third party option. So it's like that symbolic sort of change. Even though reform are just pretty much just a slightly brighter sheen of blue. It's still just because they're labelled a different way to the Tories. If they let's say end up in a position where they've got more seats than the Tories, and the Tories get so obliterated, then yeah, perhaps we've got some semblance of a chance. But I don't know. I mean, on one hand, yeah, I think it's one of those things where among my generation, it's you either get guys like me, or you get the complete opposite, where they're all tankies or shit libs who are happy to just flood the country with more immigrants. So I reckon politics in like 20 years, 30 years time is going to get a lot more radical, or even just like 15 years. Like, it's just going to get a lot more radical because on one hand, the shit libs are getting more radical.
Yeah, yeah, unless something changes, I think that's almost inevitable, to be honest. But yeah, no, I think you know the failure to do anything about this stuff is what's going to force radicalism. You know, and in fact, far from doing anything about it, they're just accelerating the speed. They're just constantly before your eyes, basically. And the same is true to a greater or lesser degree all over. So, you know, that's not happening by accident. But yeah. Mitch, did you have anything you wanted to bring up about what's going on in Ukraine at this time?
There's not really anything significant that's been going on there, other than I don't know some poll came out that said like something like a quarter of the Ukrainian population said they want negotiations for peace. I mean, they're still outnumbered for the most part by the pro-war Ukrainians, but still, apparently that number's increasing. That's the closest thing you got to news from Ukraine because yeah, there's just not really much. There's not really been any massive town
The
captures.
thing would be for Ukraine to negotiate.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I know.
Yeah. It's more of the same with Ukraine gradually losing more and more.
I would say one thing that has happened is I've seen on the BBC and again more on the BBC they're admitting the Ukrainian army is now in effectively a retreat status. The Russians have been advancing and there's more of a dialogue that Ukraine's on the back foot now, and that Russia is advancing westwards.
Yeah, I won't be surprised if that's kind of went in conjunction with Victoria Nuland resigning. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, some people. I mean, I don't know if that's going to herald some sense of a foreign policy shift where they're going to pivot more towards Israel and Palestine. Because I mean, they've already done that thus far. But I mean, could that be? I mean, replaced it with a guy who handled the evacuation from Afghanistan 3 years back, or 2.5 years,
Yeah.
I should say. So some people reckon this is just a precursor to America abandoning Ukraine and pivoting more towards the Middle East. I mean, I'm surprised, but then again, it's also, if America is seen as abandoning Ukraine, then the EU are just going to be a lot more. They're going to feel like they've been abandoned as well, because it's one of the EU are the main ones who are looking at Ukraine as a buffer state to keep them safe from the Russians. But if the Russians winning, should the Russians win in Ukraine, it's a simple matter of, well, the Russians will start to border EU countries like Romania a lot more. They've got more ground to work with and more people.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah. And it just sees
Well, I mean,
itself as a matter of the EU getting shafted foreign policy wise in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, Sweden officially joined NATO this week as well. So that the historic neutrality of Sweden is long dead. France has been, Macron's been particularly hawkish over. He's been even saying that if Russians cross the Dnieper, then French troops will meet them, or that's something like that, something to that effect. So, yeah.
Yeah, he backtracked on it from the last I heard. He just went, "Oh well,
he
just because we say we could." Yeah, he backtracked it.
What French troops? Is not enough.
Well, I mean,
Well, no.
Well, it's a kind of like at the time he said, but actually I was reading up on the Russian Civil War, and it says like, oh, yeah, the French troops. There were some French troops deployed near the area around Odessa back in like 1919, I believe, but they were withdrawn after 4 months. So
Yeah,
it's like,
you had you had French, British, and American supporting the White Russians, and you also had that Czechoslovakian Legion as well.
yeah. I mean, in fact, we did far more to help the White Russians. I mean, when you take into account, like the city of Solitsyn was taken by Ewan Cameron Bruce.
During the Russian Revolution, there were British, French, for very long, and fairly half-heartedly, it has to be said.
Yeah, it's like you did have some examples of where like we did far more in the sense that we had Ewan Cameron Bruce, for example, in a single tank, who took over an entire city of Solitsyn, which later gets called Stalingrad. For anyone who doesn't know where Solitsyn is, but yeah, it's. I don't really know what to make of the Russian Civil War, because I mean, I don't know, very nuanced.
It's Monday it's Monday Volgograd, isn't it?
Yeah,
around that area. Yeah.
Well, I've been having some discussions, shall we say, on X, on Twitter this week, with but they're claiming it's really good value for British taxpayers' money and for British weapons, and Britain's always inadequate ammunition stocks to be given to Ukraine. If Russia is in Ukraine, which is killing Russians, if we weren't arming Ukraine, then I don't really see why, because I don't see how our spheres of influence really cross these days, I just don't. And the British Armed Forces are the weakest they have been in 500 years, pretty much.
Yeah.
Royal Navy in and give. But that's just my view. And especially when Ukraine is going to lose this war anyway. It's not. The only argument is how long it's going to take the Russians to win it. It is not the can't win. It's just not possible. They should. So yeah, that's my view on it anyway. But whatever. We armed Finnish communists, Wiggles is saying in the chat. I didn't know that. I didn't even know there were many Finnish communists, to be honest, but whatever.
Well, there was a civil war in Finland, but I mean, they never had a chance. Well, they would have had a chance, but like Mannerheim kind of won the war for the Finnish in that war because at the start, because of the Soviet Bolsheviks helping the Bolshevik Finns, the Red Finns had more ammunition and guns, but they didn't have good morale like the White Finnish troops.
Oh, right, okay.
So it was. I mean, it's like there were times where like let's say you get like a Red Army barracks in Finland surrounded by the Finnish. None of the Finnish were actually armed, but they looked armed. But what happens is these Red Army barracks end up giving all their weapons to the Finnish army, which desperately needed them. And I mean, it's quite brutal. Apparently, quite brutal war. It only went on for like 9 months, I believe, but quite brutal war where, the Soviets were sending agents in like 1920s to assassinate Mannerheim because he was so successful at chucking out all the Soviet Bolsheviks in the Finnish Civil War. And by the time it was,
I know a little bit about the British interventions against the Reds, but that's about it.
Yeah, so I mean, with the Finnish, they're more supported by the Germans than they were by us. We were mainly helping the likes of Estonia and Latvia. We deployed Royal Navy assets in the area, I believe, and
some of the White Russians, etc.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where the Russian Civil War is really when you take a look at it, it's more. It doesn't matter what side won. It's the Russians were screwed all the way because they were never going to have a return to the monarchy because Tsar Nikolai was dead, along with his family. Yekaterinburg. The Bolsheviks, what need do I bother saying about them? And other than they were what they were, the White Russians, they never had a united government. Like the closest they had was Kolchak, and even then he couldn't get enough men to fight against the Bolsheviks. Too scattered and leaderless. So, and then on the other hand, you got the Mensheviks, who, whenever they rebelled, I mean, you have Tukhachevsky, who gassed entire villages in the Tambov area when they rebelled against the war communism policies. And you've got the anarchists in Ukraine. If you were someone living in the Russian Empire at that time, you were just screwed. There was no. Doesn't matter which way you chose, you were screwed all the way. Really, when you look at it, sadly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, loads of White Russians ended up going to places like Shanghai in China and stuff like this because they couldn't stay in Russia, basically.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, and a lot of those were aristocrats as well. Like you got, so these were some of the best Russians you could get. Whereas the ones and even men, I mean, I've already explained something like the industrial workers and the middle class, as well as lower aristocrats, were all part of a revolution, but the higher aristocrats and the peasantry were the main ones going against the revolution, because the peasants, they didn't like the anti-Christianity, they didn't like the war communism. And they certainly didn't like the idea of Tsar Nicholas and his family being killed off the way they were. Whereas the top aristocratic class, well, they opposed the Bolsheviks for fairly obvious reasons. So it's like, yeah, that's what
King was a bit.
I remember. Sorry.
Which I've never understood. I mean, why he. Okay, do we have any final subjects for this evening? AI, Mitch, do either of you have?
I think I can't really think of anything else, to be honest.
Yeah, it's just like, I mean, you look at.
Fair enough. Anything you would like to?
I'm gonna chuck this laptop out the window in a minute.
I think let's go. Iron Duke, sorry, you cut out a bit there. You were sort of cutting out a bit. When it comes to shilling, next week I got 2 streams going on. Yeah, I got 2 streams going on. I've got on Tuesday, I'm going to be doing like a bit what AM did, Apostolic Majesty did. I'm going to be looking at the life and the lore as in LORE of Tiber Septim or Talos from the Elder Scrolls series, comparing him to figures in our history and timeline, which should be good. And then on Thursday we'll be carrying on hopefully with the Richard Hilton book. This will be on Britain's expansion within India, so this should be a good one. Last episode we did, it was around the American Wars of Independence. So yeah, this one we're going to be looking at the British Empire just after their loss of their colonies in the 13 colonies.
Okay, well, that'll be interesting. Yeah, Richard Hilton's Strange Death of the British Empire is a good book. It's a good series. I've been listening to that one that AI's been doing. So do
it's a good.
check that out, guys, on AI's channel, which is Mitch.
AI,
any final subjects or anything you would like to share, mate?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you now, mate. Yeah. Any final topics or anything you'd like to share?
No, I can't think of anything. I mean, other than, I don't know, I feel like I'm going to rip out my internet router in a minute. It keeps cutting me out at the moment. So I don't even know if I'm going to be around in like a minute's time. So
yeah, there's definitely been some sound problems on this episode. I hope it's not me, but I will try and sort it out by next week. Anyway, thank you to my guests, Mitch, and to AI. Do go and check out AI Shire Tory, the AI's channel. It's got some good content on there. In the meantime, we will see you next week for Splendid Isolation number 163.